This morning we're interviewing Will Arola, a resident of Crawfordsville, Indiana, who served during the Korean War. Will, where were you June 25th, 1950, at the start of the mess?
Well, let's start over just a little bit.
Okay.
In the respect that everybody calls me Bill.
Bill? Okay, sorry.
They won't understand Will.
Okay.
Now, they could call me a lot of other things, but Bill is what we're going to go by.
I've been called a lot of things, too. Okay. Shall we start over, Conrad?
Well, whatever you want to.
This morning we are interviewing Bill Arola, a native of Walker, Minnesota, and a resident now of Crawfordsville, Indiana. Bill, do you remember where you were June 25th, 1950?
Well, yeah, I was working at Donnelly's at the time, and hoping I wouldn't be called up for service. But basically, yes, I was working at Donnelly's.
That was a Sunday, I remember. It was a beautiful day. And when were you drafted into the Army?
Now, you know, that was a false statement. I'm going to have to start over.
Okay.
I'm going to have to start over.
Well, that's all right. Go ahead. I can get it out.
Okay. On June 25th of 1950, I was actually still in Walker, Minnesota, which was the place I was born. And I didn't come to Indiana until November of 1950. And basically, I don't remember what I was doing on the 25th, but I was still in Walker, Minnesota.
Did you enlist or did you get drafted into the Army?
I was a draftee.
And where did you take your basic?
I took my basic in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, the so-called hellhole of the world. Yes, and I stayed there my entire stint in the Army.
And Fort Leonard Wood, was that an artillery school or armored school or infantry school?
It was an infantry school. It was actually the 6th Armored Division, and but it was basically infantry. And then when you went on to advanced training, it was engineer training.
And what was your job after basic? You stayed there. What was your assignment after basic?
After basic, I went to engineer school, and then I continued on to leadership school, and that's the basic reason why I stayed at Fort Leonard Wood during my entire 2 years in the service.
You were an instructor.
That's correct.
And what did you teach? Bridge building or pontoon bridge building or?
No, actually I was an instructor in communications, basic communications, which entailed telephone, field telephones, radios, and so forth. It was all basic training to the basic trainees.
Basic trainees. And you achieved the rank of staff sergeant.
That's correct.
That you went up very quickly. In 2 years to go from private to staff sergeant is quite an achievement.
Well, I was coached a little bit in that respect. Just before I was to get out of the service, they said, you're going to go up before the colonel and you might get a promotion. And they said, there's one thing that you want to do. You want to have fingernail clippers in your pocket and a jackknife, and you want to be able to tell him something about your Army library. And I had those things all memorized and ready to go, and he asked me those very questions. And he says, I think I'll put you in for a promotion. And it was a little bit ironic. They also asked if I thought I might want to make a career in the Army, and I said, well, I've been thinking about it, but I haven't made up my mind. And that may have been some event that swayed them to give me a promotion.
And then how long were you staff sergeant instructor at Fort Leonard Wood after that interview with the colonel?
Well, actually, I stayed on. I actually volunteered to go to Korea because I thought at that time instructing basic trainees cycle after cycle after cycle was one of the worst things that could happen to a guy, because you were stuck in one position, and Fort Leonard Wood was not a nice place to be. And I thought, I'd like to get out of here. But they said, no, you can't go because we're short of instructors, and you're going to be frozen at this base for the entire time in your service. So there I was, stuck at Fort Leonard Wood, training each cycle, each eight-week cycle actually, and it was pretty boring, really.
You were released from active duty February 1955. Did you sign up for the reserves?
Yes, I did, and I signed up in the reserves at Waveland. They had an artillery unit down there, and I was basically, I don't really know what my job was, but I did quite a bit of, I'm going to say I was a squad leader, and some of the first sergeant at the time said, I'd like to get somebody with these men that just got out of the service and give them a taste of what real service is like. And he gave me the job of drilling them and so on. And it was a pretty tough job because those boys were pretty tough or pretty close knit unit of men, and it was hard to not fall right in with their style of training, and consequently it was quite a chore to work with those men for a while, but it worked out quite well.
How long did you stay in the reserves?
You know, I don't really remember actually. Probably 5 or 6 years. I don't really remember when my papers say that I got out of the reserves.
Was it very difficult for you to readjust to civilian life?
No, actually, the adjustment to civilian life was just very easy transition because I went right back to my old job, and I applied for the GI Bill, and I actually went into an apprenticeship at Donnelly's, and my GI Bill came through, and really it was a very easy transition because they actually helped a great deal with the with your wages, and I didn't suffer any as far as being in the service or being able to make the transition very easily.
I'm glad to hear that. Would you like to make any more comments about your experiences?
Well, there was a few. Of course, I got married when I was in the service to my wife Charlene, and we lived off post, and that was a very difficult time because when you tried to live on Army wages, you really, well, you did make ends meet, but you surely didn't have anything for any luxuries or anything of that sort, and that was really the most difficult time in my life as far as making ends meet and trying to make a semi-comfortable living for my wife at the time.
Was she from Crawfordsville or was she from Walker, Minnesota?
My wife was from Crawfordsville. I met her down here when I came from Minnesota, and her name was Charlene Eiler, and I actually met her through her brother that worked at Donnelly's, and we worked together on the presses, and that's how I met my wife.
What brought you to Crawfordsville from Minnesota? Were you with Donnelly's in Minnesota?
No, Donnelly's was unheard of in Minnesota. I lived in an area that was a tourist area, and there was a lady, or actually a doctor, that had a summer cottage up on the lake that I lived on, and his sister-in-law came up there every summer, and she was from Crawfordsville. She had asthma, and she said, I said, well, my asthma doesn't bother me while I'm up here. I'll just stay up here all summer. Well, we got to be friends. I took her fishing and various things, and did odd jobs around the cabin, and it really evolved in quite a friendship. And she said, well, if you ever need a job or a place to go, I come down to Crawfordsville and we'll see that you get a job. So that particular year, I was quite a hunter. They decided not to have a deer season. And that might seem a little bit odd to some people, but during that period, I was quite a deer hunter. And I said to my mother, my father had passed away, and I said, I'm getting out of here. Because at that time, which was 1950, it comes about the 1st of September, that country kind of closes down because all the tourist trade is gone, and it's just the local people left. And there really is very few jobs unless you're working for the state or the county or the civil groups that are around. So I decided to come down to Crawfordsville, and that's how I came to Crawfordsville.
You're still quite a hunter and fisherman, aren't you? That Minnesota, it's in your blood?
Oh, sure, the hunting never really leaves you unless you're crippled. And I go back to Minnesota, I go fishing and hunting, and I've still got people up there, brothers and sisters, and I'm the youngest in the family, so consequently they're getting some age on them. But I still like to go pheasant hunting in Iowa and deer hunting in Indiana, and last summer I went fishing in Canada with seven gentlemen from this area, and it makes a well-rounded life.
Now your family has owned or been in the restaurant business and is kind of a historical thing here in the area. When did you first get into the restaurant business?
Well, we like to think that it's a historical place because there are so many old standbys that come in and they say, well, if you ever close, we don't know what we're going to do. So we think that, yes, it's an old standby. Well, my wife worked for, I'm going to say, 2 owners of Uncle Smiley's. And when they wanted to get out of the business, my wife says, you know, I've been more or less running this place for X number of years. Why don't we just buy it? And I said, well, you know, I'm getting ready to retire. I don't want to work anymore. She says, well, I'll take care of it. So we bought Uncle Smiley's, and consequently, yes, she has taken care of it, and it is a chore. But of course, I help out if the wolf comes a howling and says I need help, and consequently, that's how that evolved.
How long has that been known as Uncle Smiley's?
Well, I really don't know that answer. I'm going to say about 25 years. No, or maybe just a little bit longer. Actually, my sister-in-law bought the so-called Uncle Smiley's and wanted to know what they could call it. And their name was Smiley. So I said, why don't you call it Uncle Smiley's? And the name has stuck ever since.
Okay, so that's where the name started. What was it? Do you remember what it was called before that?
Well, it was the Park and Eat, and there were several other names which I can't recall right now.
Is it the oldest continuously operating restaurant in the county?
Well, I can't be sure about that, but if it isn't, it's close.
Yeah.
You know, the Redwood operated for quite a number of years, but they closed. So consequently, yes, probably we are.
And now, before it moved to its present location, did you and Charlene buy it? Was it still further down the road, or?
Yes, we bought it when it was over the hill,
Okay.
west on 136, and then we had an opportunity to buy the Rhodes building, and we thought, well, we should do that and enlarge it somewhat, and that's what we did.
And now your son's taking over management, is that what I understood you to say?
That's correct. My son is the manager. He is the day manager specifically, and then we have a night manager. My daughter was the day manager until her daughter became ill, and she had to take care of her, which involved about 2 years. And the granddaughter was diagnosed with cancer, and that was a full year time obligation to basically all of us for a year. And now that seems to be under control, and my daughter is starting to do some odd jobs around the restaurant as needed, and it's working out very well.
So how many years were you at Donnelly's?
I was at Donnelly's 40 years.
Yeah.
I retired when I was 57. So consequently, you can realize that I started at Donnelly's when I was 17. And they said when I started, you can't work on machinery at night. And I said, well, I don't know what the difference is, day or night. Well, that's just the law. And then they said, I was there for a week, and they said, we need a guy on nights. And I still hadn't turned 18 yet. And I said, how about that 17-year-old thing? I'm not going to be 18 for a month or so. And they said, well, that'll be all right till you turn 18. So it was kind of ironic that I got on shift work at that time.
What was your impression of the recruits that you trained at Fort Leonard Wood?
Well, the troops as such were, you have to take them as your impression as followers, because if they weren't followers, well, they were getting in trouble somewhere along. But the biggest problem was, as an instructor, to keep the troops' attention. And that was pretty difficult, because sometimes they were kept up late at night scrubbing the barracks, and then they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever, or they were out in the field on bivouac, and keeping their attention was probably the biggest problem with young recruits. But you know, an instructor has to have inflection on his voice and so on to keep their attention. And one of the things that we used to say, everyone that's asleep, please stand up. Of course, you'd always catch 2 or 3 that were asleep, and that was quite a trick that we used to pull on them.
Well, you weren't much older than they were you, at that point?
Well, I was 20.
Yeah.
They were what, 18, 17, 18-year-olds?
You know, I really don't know. You just did your job,
Yeah.
and that was the situation.
Thank you very much for coming in, Bill.
I appreciate it.